Hello everyone and welcome back to another WARNO tier list, as this time around we're gonna go over bombers, and that means HE bombs, rockets and napalm bombs. If a plane has those, it's in here. If it has other weapons that are anti-tank next to it, that still counts. So yeah, we have over 100 planes to go through, so let's start. And let's start with the Belgians here into this tier list. S means it's absolutely top of its class. D means it's basically unusable. C, some use cases. B, pretty standard. A, above average. So let's get in here with Mirage 5BA HE bomber here. And that one is pretty expensive. It has 30% ECM though. It's decently fast, and it has 400 kilogram bombs. All of that, in my eyes, make it a pretty B tier unit. It has sidewinders as well, but those are the terrible AM9Ps that don't really get a job done well. And that means that it is not really super useful as a multi-role plane to shoot down helicopters, even with its 40mm, 30mm guns, or especially fighting enemy planes. It won't be able to kill them. And then we have a plane that is, in my eyes, just a clear upgrade to it, and that is the Mirage 5BA Mercip. Costs 5 points more, and it gets better sideminders. A lot better with AM9Ms. And it gets slightly bigger bombs as well, that also allow it to one-shot stuff. And yeah, those 5 points difference, you get a lot for that. So, in comparison here, the Mirage 5BA Mercip 80 unit is still pretty expensive. That's the issue there, but outside of that, it is a pretty solid plane. And then we come to a napalm plane with the Mirage napalm, and I'm not a big fan of napalm planes currently in the game. Napalm not dealing damage to units and buildings makes napalm pretty unusable right now for most cases when it comes to dropping it off planes, as it's not really great against infantry, and against tanks you have better options all around. So Mirage 5BA napalm here, going into D tier, having the same sidewinder issue then as the Mirage 5BA, and no killing power here really. The Mirage 5BA rocket has Hydra rockets. It is cheap. It's one good thing. 30% ECM on a rocket plane that is pretty fast and gets some Hydra rockets out, but the Hydras are not great rockets. And it has a quick reload time as well. Like, that's an important part of planes as well. As well, it only has a minute of reload time when it doesn't get damaged. But I'm still not convinced on the Mirage 5BA here. If it would have some AM9Ps next to it as well, then it could be quite decent, as it then could potentially be a helicopter killer that also does some damage on the ground. But just with the Hydras, it just doesn't kill stuff efficiently enough. So, C tier here for me, for the Mirage 5BA. The survivability and all are still okay, but I'm not the biggest fan. And then we have the cluster F-16A, and that one also brings 6 227 kilogram bombs. It only has 20% ECM, it doesn't have any air-to-air missiles, which F-16 usually come with, and it has 2 cluster bombs with the 227 kilogram bombs next to it. It usually kills vehicles, but it also has a pretty long reload time due to the 6 227 kilogram bombs that bring it up to 3 minutes of reload, and without sidewinders and with only 20 CM on this F-16, I'm not the biggest fan of it. Like, it takes too long for the reload, it doesn't kill everything with the HE bombs, and yeah, the loadout is good, but without the sidewinders, I'd rather take the Mercip that also gets you slightly more ECM and has a better gun as well. So that's the Belgians. Let's move on to the East Germans, where we start with some small boys, the L-39s here. Starting with the cluster, and the cluster is here for the same reason as the F-16A. It comes with bombs as well. So it has 2 cluster bombs, it has 2 HE bombs. It is pretty expensive, 80 points. For being a 6 hit point super slow plane with 0 ECM. Like most medium-sized AA missiles one-shot this thing. And it has low speed and all. If it gets on target against a tank, it can deal decent damage, but it still might not quite kill them, even with the extra HE bombs. So, for me, this is a C tier kind of unit. Then we come to the rocket variant, which has a similar issue of not killing stuff reliably enough. It's a good bit cheaper, but it can't kill tanks. It can only be used against infantry and ATGM positions and so on with some reliability, but even then, it might not quite kill them. And yeah, it also gets killed off quite easily. So I'm not the biggest fan there. The 2 500 kilogram bombs of the last one for 20 points less make it a slight bit better, but I would put it into C tier here as well. Let's actually put the rocket one into D tier, because it really can't kill super much and has to get a bit closer as well, diving down there. So yeah, L39 here into D tier we go. Next planes here are the MiG-21s, and we start with the one with the most impact historically, and that is the MiG-21 BIS HE. There were times when this was 10 hit points and 130 points, I believe, and it was super OP. It got nerfed since then, but it is still pretty solid. It is fast, it comes in and it gets its bombs dropped off, dealing decent amount of damage. Great to finish off tanks that you started to hurt earlier. Great of finishing off any soft target that you need to get rid of. 150 points for a fast plane that can get out pretty quickly as well. It's a nice escape button again. It was at 165 points, where it went down to B or maybe even C tier. And I don't think it's super OP yet again, but it is pretty strong and it helps out KDA 7th and 4th for sure quite nicely. It comes with 3 availability as well, which helps out as well. And yeah, the MiG-21 BIS here is solid A tier plane. As I would even put it above the Mersip here as a fantastic little bomber that can just come in. Napalm variant has 2 napalm and 2 small 250 kilogram bombs. If napalm ever gets fixed, this might actually be kind of decent. Currently, napalm is worse, it pays more. That's just a D tier unit. Don't take these MiG-21 napalms, they are not worthwhile. Then we come to the rocket planes, and we start with the MiG-21 BIS rocket. One that counts for 125 points, and it comes with some 122 and some 57mm rockets. Those have decent damage output, and it can come in quickly, deal some damage, and run out again. And I think it's a pretty okay plane. I would put it into B tier here. It's solidly cheap. It can deal a bit of damage even to armor with those bigger rockets. It most likely won't kill them, but against anything lighter it can deal decent damage. Has a bit of damage output out in its gun as well. And the cheap price is just the selling point here for fast, a plane that can come in. Kind of similar story to the S-24 variant, the Rocket 2. The S-24s are a bit more accurate than they had been in the past, so they actually are somewhat reliable now, and they can deal damage to pretty much anything. You won't one-tap most units of this, but it still is a nice finisher. Multiple of these are nice, and if it's a low hit point unit, you can kill them off of this as well. So MiG-21 BIS rocket, decently good in its roles here. I like the one with 2 smaller rockets for the reliability a bit more, though this one has a bit more potential against heavier vehicles if it hits its rockets. So yeah, both here going into B tier, solid little units. Then the MiG-23 lineup of these Germans, quite a lot of units in here. These Germans in general having a decent amount of planes here in this. And we start with the AT, because the MiG-23 BN AT also has some 80mm rockets. And they are not really impactful. Like, the only thing where they can be somewhat decent is when you actually try to strafe an enemy AA unit and you stress them out a bit with that, so that it doesn't hit you back as badly. But outside of that, they're not amazing. The ATGM missiles on this are not great either. I think this is a high C tier unit. Like, it's not terrible. It gets the job done, but the rockets also have a pretty long reload time there. The 80mm rockets. And yeah, the missile on it are not amazing. The rockets are okay. It's pretty cheap still, so that helps out. But it's not the king of the battlefield. Then we come to the KMGU, which is a HE cluster plane. And the HE cluster on it is pretty decent. It has a bit of an issue with it only drops one of its payloads at a time and so on, and you have to be a bit finicky. That's a big issue. It is pretty expensive for 10% ECM plane as well. So the KMGU is struggling there as well. And another big issue of this is that the reload time of the bomblets is 6 minutes. And that is just too long. That is just way too long. And that is an issue why I would put this actually into low C tier for its price. Because it doesn't have the high ECM, and it is a really expensive plane for all of that. And it doesn't have any air-to-air capabilities. It only does that ground target. It can only work against soft targets, and it can get killed off pretty easily. So, yeah, MiG-23BN KMGU goes into C tier here. If they ever lower the reload cost, the reload time to like half of it, like if it would go to 3 minutes, if it would go maybe even further, then it could start to be a pretty decent unit, but the 6-minute reload time means that even if you get a successful run, it is out for such a long time, and you don't really feel like you get rewarded for it. So, C tier here for it. And then we come to the MiG-23 BN rocket, and that is pretty similar to these guys up here. It has the 240mm rockets, but it also has some 80mm rockets, so it does get a bit more damage in for 10 points, making it a bit more reliable there. It has longer reload time though. That's an issue. Like, that's one of the good thing about the S24 is it actually has a really short reload time, so actually let's put it up a bit further. The S80 rockets next to it have actually the effect that it takes longer to reload, but it can get reliable stuff done, so I like it for that. And yeah, the MiG-23 BN here going into B tier as a decent little unit. MiG-23 MF with 6 500kg bombs. That is another interesting unit. It is an absolute nuke. It has 20% ECM. And it is a complete delete button. But by now it costs 275 points. Means that you need to get more than 1 kill on an Abrams to actually pay this thing off. And that's not that easy. Like, the efficiency of it has dropped considerably. It has been nerfed a good couple of times. And at this stage, it's pretty expensive for what it does. I still think it is having a decent amount of value as a just absolute nuke button that you have around. It has a 3-minute reload time, which is also not fantastic. But yeah, it can nuke everything. And that is for sure of value. It just doesn't do that cost efficiently anymore. And that is an issue. And if you lose it without getting the job done, it has a problem. Like, you're in big trouble if this dies to enemy AA. And it can do that with 20% ECM. It has a bit better chances of survival than some of the other planes we saw, but it still can absolutely do that, and that is a problem. Then the MiG-23 BN HE. It's 220 points. It's 55 points cheaper. It gets 2 less bombs. Issue is, it drops them from up high, and the enemy can't dodge them. So it's another C tier kind of unit. The drop pattern of it is not amazing. And then we have the napalm plane at last, which is pretty terrible. And yeah, something that you absolutely should avoid. Goes into C tier here as well. Has maybe a bit better drop pattern than the others, as it drops up high and really sets a field of flame, but that doesn't really help you at the moment. Like, napalm currently is not in a good place at all, especially not for bombers. Like, the MLRS with napalm can deny nicely, and they don't have to risk themselves, but you don't want to risk your unit for the napalm effect currently. So, yeah, these guys, not at the spot. And yeah, the MiG-23s here, all okay planes, but not really great. MiG-21s, mostly, doing a better job, actually. And that gets us to the final airframe for the East Germans, the Su-22. And those are pretty amazing. And yeah, we had them pretty high in the AT tab and the AT tape list back in the day as well. The bomber ones, not half bad either. Su-22 M4 here starts the whole thing, and that thing is 10 points cheaper than the MiG-23 with 2 less bombs, meaning it has 1 minute less reload time. It has 10% more ECM. It is slightly slower, but it still nukes most things. It has a good gun as well with the 30mm, and it has 2 air-to-air missiles. And all of that has good value. It's a good helicopter killer. If you can get a helicopter killed and then drop the bombs in one run, you are absolutely in the money. And it's a solid A tier unit here in my eyes. Then we have the HE2, and that adds the 2 extra bombs, adding an extra minute of reload, but making absolutely sure that whatever you drop on is dead. So, yeah, it's up here as well. And then we come to the napalm. That just goes back into the dumpster. But then we also have 2 rocket variants. And one is with the S-24s again. And the other one is with extra gun pods and big rockets. So the S-24 rocket variant, it pays extra price here. But these here traded the ECM for speed mostly. With the other frames, here you pay 30 points extra over the MiG-21s and the MiG-23s, and that's a bit of an issue. If you would be the same price as these guys, the Su-22 M4 rocket would actually be pretty dope, especially as its 30mm guns would allow it to get a nice strafing consistency and killing off all small vehicles. And the Su-22 M4 UPK pays a lot extra for it. And that's also makes it a C tier kind of unit. It doesn't have air-to-air missiles. It only has rockets and the 23mm gun, and those don't have really good penetration also. It's not like an Su-25 or an A-10 that can just shred tanks or so. And for that, for only being able to hunt down soft targets, it's not good enough. It's a good helicopter hit killer, as those guns can fire at helicopters as well. But outside of that, the UPK suffers a bit, so yeah, the frames here lose a bit in performance. Then we come to the French, and here we start with some Alpha Jets, and those are pretty okay. 180-second reload time because it has 6 bombs. It has 10% ECM. It costs 80 points. If you compare that to what we saw with the L39s, it's same price as the cluster one. Has 2 extra bombs and has 10% ECM, so it's a bit better. I'm still not a big fan of it. I would put it around here, I guess. Yeah, the UPK actually goes a bit further back. And actually the Su-22, let's put it into high C tier. It's okay, but it's not amazing. And then the napalm one goes where napalm planes go. And then we are with the Jaguars. And here we start with a pretty good one. The Jaguar HE has 400 kilogram bombs, so it can nuke a lot of things. And it has 2 sidewinders, so it's a good helicopter hunter as well. It only has 20% ECM, but that's okay. Like, if you compare it to the Mirage, it gets 15 points cheaper. If you compare it to the other Mirage, it is still cheaper. And it has less ECM. That's the one thing. But I still think in general it's a bit better. Like, it's 10 points cheaper here than the Mirage. And it has the better air-to-air missiles with the Magics. So actually, like, let's put this here up here into the 8 here. Just fine bomber line. Then Jaguar Napalm. That's another Jaguar with Napalm. And Napalm goes where Napalm goes. And then we come to the Jaguar rocket. And that is similar to the Mirage rocket. It is the same price actually. It gets snap missiles, which are okay. It has a DIFA gun. It only has 20% ECM. The Mirage has better ECM there. So I would put it around here. If it would have air-to-air missiles next to it, it would be quite nice. Good helicopter hunter and so on. Without that, it's not so great. Can't really add to the air superiority of your deck or anything. It really only does the rocket thing and can overwhelm air superiority a bit. Can like if the enemy is based around their ground AA and you spot them, and you can send that in to overwhelm them and damage them a bit. That can be nice and all, but it's not amazing. And then we come to the Mirage 5F, and that plane is nicely priced. It has 10 bombs. The big issue of the Mirage 5F is that the bombs, you pay for reload time, 30 seconds reload time for every bomb, and you don't pay by payload. A really big issue in WARNO, and I still don't quite get why Eugen can't fix it, but it is an issue. If this thing would have a 180 second reload time, it would be so much better. It has missiles next to those 10 bombs. It's a big bomb truck, but the reload time is holding it back, making it hard to really put it, because those 10 250 kilogram bombs, they are nukes, and it's cheaper than all of these planes up here by a lot. But it also is out for 5 minutes after it drops, and that makes it hard to evaluate. I would put it into B tier. And yeah, if it would go to 180 second reload time, you could even add 10 points and it would still go up to A tier, potentially S tier. But currently it's more of a B tier unit just because of the reload. Then we come to the Mirage 5F, and that's another napalm plane. So we put them where napalm planes go. And then first LGB bomber of the plane of the whole shenanigans, the Mirage F1 CT, just came down a bit in price, and that was needed. Its LGBs are not the most amazing. It has 30% ECM, and LGBs are still pretty good, and it has Magics. So with the slightly cheaper price now, like I before would have said it was a C tier unit, maybe a B tier unit. I would put it in high B tier now. The Mirage here, F1 CT, LGB. It's a decent plane. Yeah. Then we come to the Mirage 4, and that is another plane that suffers under reload time. It has the longest reload time in the game, 480 seconds. That's just endless, and it is making it amazing. Like it's one of the few high altitude bombers that absolutely leaves a field of destruction, but it means that it can only drop that every 8 minutes, and that is just rough. If like every 8 minutes is such an insane reload time when the game goes only 40 minutes. Like even if you bring it in minute 1 with the flight time and all, you can at maximum get it 4 times out on the battlefield in the whole game, and with big gaps in between. And That's an issue, like compared to all the other planes here. It is pretty cheap for its stats. 40% ECM, it has those bombs, it's fast. Like outside of that, it's pretty cheap for its stats. But I would put it here. If it would, like this one could even live with a 5-minute reload time. If this would go down to 5 minutes, I think that would be fine because it is such a bomb truck. Like it shouldn't come around all the time, but it should go down a bit in reload time, and then it would be pretty okay. With it, how it is, I would put it into C tier here this time around. The seat variant still has 6 of those bombs, 180-minute reload, and has a seat missile. That's a good bit better. And yeah, it is an A-tier plane. Issue is the division can't really use it super much outside of that. Like it's a decent seat plane. The missile is not amazing. The Martel is pretty short range, but it's only has the same ECM, only 40% compared to some other seat planes. That's not amazing, but it is pretty cheap and it has a decent turnaround time. So there it goes. And then the last of the French bomber planes, those are the Super Étendards. And here we start with a rocket plane. As the Super Étendard rocket has Magiques and snaps. It doesn't always reliably kill because it only has one weapon snap and only 36 missiles. It's a fantastic helicopter killer though, and the Super Étendard is a fantastic frame. It's pretty fast, 30% ECM, has a good cannon, and 2 Magic 2s are pretty good missiles as well. So this is better in my eyes than most of the other rocket planes, because it is an helicopter killer as well. Like, those kind of rocket planes double as helicopter killers quite nicely. And I would put it in an A tier actually, even. As it can kill off your small teams on the ground, like can kill off a Mistral, can kill off ATGM team, and then it also can kill helicopters, and it can help out in air superiority. Like, it can deal damage to a plane. So if you have a big air spam coming in, like, it can help out in that overwhelming force in the sky as well. And then we have the Super Étendard HE. And that's another nuke bomber. Like, that's 400 kilogram bombs times 6. It doesn't have air-to-air missiles. And that's a massive disadvantage to the Mirage, to the Jaguar HE as well. Yeah, it gets 10% ECM over the Jaguar, but it loses the Magiques, and that's worth... like, the Magiques are worth more than 10% ECM. As it doesn't hunt helicopters, it doesn't help winning against other planes. That's a problem. So, for 250 points, it's still better than the MiG-21, as it has the better ECM, and it is still cheaper. So, I would put it here in below B tier, but it doesn't quite get the multi-role here done as well. So, that's the end of the French. Gets us to the Dutch, where we start with an F-16A. And that is pretty okay. It has decent all-round missiles, the AIM-9Ls. It's not the best with the M's, but it's pretty okay. And it has 450 kilogram bombs. So yeah, 4E has a good bomber in it. And I would put that around here. It's 30% ECM as well on these airframes. So yeah, it's 5 points cheaper than the Mirage, whilst having just a similar payload. So yeah, going here above the Mirage Mersip as a really solid bomber. And then we come to the F5s in the Dutch, starting with the rocket. And that's just another rocket truck, but it is priced for that. Like 125 points, 20% ECM, it's decently fast, 10 hit points. Like that, it has more hit points than the MiG-21s, and has slightly worse rockets, but it has more hit points and more ECM. better survivability. It's slightly slower as well, though in general I would put it around the same thing. It's a decent B-tier rocket plane here. Like, still a fast one, still is decently survivable, and comes around. And then we have the HE F5, and that has two 450 kilogram bombs, which can kill most things. And it has two sidewinders. It's terrible sidewinders, it's the AIM-9Ps again. But at least it makes it a multi-role against helicopters. Issue is it pays a decent amount for it, 250 points. It's not the best price for an F5 airframe. But with its multi-role capabilities, I would put it around B tier here as well. Like, it can help out a decent amount with the bombs. It can help out a decent amount with everything. And it's a good multi-role. Like, it does the multi-role job. You pay a bit of an extra for it being multi-role, but it can come in a hunch and help out with air superiority. It can help out with killing helicopters. It can help out with killing something on the ground, and it can do all of those things. And that's nice for an F5. It doesn't get one-shotted by coops and so on, so yeah. All of that helping out the F5 here, being a decent B-tier unit. So, next nations, it's the Polish, and in the Polish tab, we start with a fun little plane, the LIM 6M. And the LIM 6M is an 80-point plane with rockets. And the rockets can kill off light vehicles, and it is fast. It is really fast, and that is, like, for such a old and cheap airframe, and that actually pushes it a good bit in here as well. Like, I would say it's a solid B tier unit. It's a lot better than the slower planes down here, because the enemy can't react as slowly to it. Like, if you bring it out, the enemy can't just wait until they can buy a fighter and shoot it down. They come in, hit, and then get out before the enemy can do that, so they have to have something ready to deal with the LIM 6M, and if they don't, for 80 points you can be pretty annoying. So that's quite helpful. Then we have the MiG-21 HE. That is exactly the same as the East German, so that's an A-tier unit. And then we have the rocket, which is exactly the same as the German MiG-21 Rocket 2, so that goes there as well. Su-22 HE, that's exactly the same, so that goes up there. Napalm goes where napalm goes. And then we have have two rocket planes here, and they come with multi-role. So the Su-22 rocket here, remember, it's a C-tier rocket plane that doesn't get air-to-air missiles. The Polish one costs exactly the same, and it gets air-to-air missiles, and that just puts it up into A-tier here. Like, that puts it next to the Super 18 Dart. It has good rockets here. And yeah, the other one is slightly cheaper. It has worse missile rockets. And this doesn't help them out super much, but it's still a decent plane. And yeah, puts it into A-tier here as well. Like, those Su-22s as multi-role that can murder helicopters for cheap, like cheaper than a lot of helicopters that you can kill with them. It's only R60Ms, but it's still an air-to-air missile, and it comes around and it hits things. So Su-22s here going into A tier, and yeah, coming around there. And then we have the Soviet Union next. So going into the next block, and here we go with some L-39s again. Starting with the HE bomber, and that's exactly what the German one does, so that's fine there. Napalm can go here, as always. And then we got a MiG-23 with 8 bombs. It's 500 kilogram bombs. Issue is the MiG-23 is pretty slow and turns like a truck. It has 30% ACM, 230 points. It doesn't have any air-to-air missiles. The MiG-25 here. It doesn't have any air-to-air missiles. And it comes in pretty slowly, so the enemy can react to it and run away and it's a high altitude bomber, so the enemy wants to spread out its units because the amount of area that the bombs cover is pretty nice, but the enemy can play around it quite a bit. And all of that, I would say, puts this into C tier territory here. And then we have the MiG-27K AT, and that's a really fantastic AT plane out of 56. One of the reasons why 56 is so good. It has a good AT missile with the KH-29L. 30 damage, good range, 50% accuracy. And it has some rockets. It can do some damage with it. Twin 30mm helping out nicely as well. So like it can strafe things to death as well next to the AT missiles. Like it's a fantastic AT plane. And AT planes in general currently often better than HE planes in a lot of scenarios. And this one does both a bit and does it decently. So, and it's still pretty cheap. Like 220 points is actually pretty damn cheap for being able to one-shot Leo 2s. And then getting some extra damage out. 30% ECM is pretty fine as well. Speed is pretty okay. So that's an S tier unit there. It shows kind of, it's a good unit to show the difference between AT planes and bombers currently, and why I currently didn't put anything else into S tier yet in this tier list, because like even the good bombers don't quite get there. Like the cost efficiency compared to a MiG-23MF, it's 55 points cheaper, it has better ECM, can kill the enemy from slightly further away, and also still hit multiple targets. Like that's the difference there. And that's for 55 points cheaper. So yeah, there we go. Then we have MiG-27M HE, which has 4 500 kilogram bombs. It's a high altitude bomber, and there 4 bombs are an issue because you don't hit enough space for the enemy to not be able to dodge it. So the enemy can dodge this one quite nicely, and that's the reason why it's so cheap. Like if it would be a dive bomber, it would be above 200 immediately. With it being a high altitude bomber, it isn't. And yeah, it's still not great though. Like that's the issue here. MiG-27M, it's too easy to dodge them currently, and they go around here. Then we come to the first Soviet LGB, and that's the MiG-27K LGB. That one is pretty interesting. It is decently affordable nowadays, and the bombs are pretty good as well. They kill most things, and it has some air-to-air missiles as well. It's not what you want to do with this thing, but it has some. It has actually 4 R60Ms to go around, and that allows it to be pretty decent at the job there. And I would put it higher than the French one. It has a slightly cheaper price, and yeah, no, it's actually around there. It can one-shot most things. I would put actually both in low A tier here, as they can kill things pretty decently, and then still fly away. They hit them from up top. Well, actually, let's push it even higher. If you compare it to the Mercip, it has 30% ECM and all. Like the price efficiency is there. This one here is a bit more expensive, but like this can trade against an M1A1. This one does slightly not do that, and like that's like usually you want to hit heavy tanks with it, so that's an interesting spot to keep the cut. Then we have napalm planes; those go nowhere. And then we have a MiG-27 with rockets, and only 80mm rockets. Long reload time because of those 80mm rockets being so weirdly supply expensive. And it's not a good rocket plane. Like 160 points, the SU-22s with multi-roll, with better ECM and so on, and being fast, or same price, same speed, a bit faster. They did it better. These guys do it better. So this is actually kind of a D tier unit. Don't take the MiG-27. It's not a good airframe for the whole rocket thing in general. Then we have the Su-17 rocket. It has the 120mm rockets. And it has sidewinders as well. It has 30% ECM. It's basically an SU-22. Uh, and like stats-wise, it's exactly identical here. And that puts it up to the SU-22 rockets here. Like, it has different types of rockets. Still pretty low reload time though, and the 122mm rockets are quite nice. I believe it might struggle to get them all off at once, but they are dealing pretty good damage, so they go there and do a decent job. And then we have the SU-24HE, and that one is a big pattern bomber with 500kg bombs. It's a bit faster than the MiG-25, and it has a gun, but that gun is not super important. Not gonna kill anything with it. Goes around the same spot. It's similar inefficiency. Yeah, and same reload time, same bomb load. So goes around there. And then we have the SU-24 LGB, which just nukes things out of existence in 119th. It has only 30% ECM, and it drops both at once, I believe. Yeah, it hits things pretty hard, but it's pretty expensive for it, and it doesn't have the multi-role purpose. Like, that's why I actually pushed up the other two LGBs a bit, because the multi-role has some impact there. Even stressing out fighters so that they don't hit you as well is important. This one, the SU-24, doesn't quite do that. So I would put that into BT as an LGB. It still does the LGB thing, but it doesn't do anything outside of that, and it still, even there, is only decently cost efficient. Being put into one of the most expensive decks with 119 on top doesn't help this expensive plane out either. And then we have the SU-22 LGB2, and that's a lot better. It has 3 bombs, and it can drop them one by one, and they all are nukes. So you can get a kill on 3 things in one run with this. And that is absolutely worthwhile, the extra. Like, getting 2 kills already in one run can make this easily pay off. With 3, you absolutely pay off. So if you can protect this thing has massive potential. It is priced for that effect as well, though. So that keeps it out of S tier for me, because it costs exactly that, and if you lose it a bit earlier, that can be devastating. 315 points is expensive. It only has 30% ECM, like, it's not invulnerable. But what it can kill, it kills really nicely. So up there it goes. Then we have Napalm, that goes down here. And then we have an interesting plane, as we have the SU-24 TRM, and that's a thermobaric unit. 1 out of 2, with the other one being the big boy, the Buratino. And those bombs, they deal more damage against, like, they ignore cover, so they deal great damage against units in towns, but they don't deal as much damage against armored units. So that's a weird trade-off. So it's really just there to bomb towns, and for that it's slightly too expensive. And I don't think you usually take this thing. I would push it back here. Like, if it would be slightly cheaper for 250 points, 240 points, like, the thermobaric trade could be really somewhat interesting, but most bombs destroy buildings and so on already. So in the end, yeah, I don't think it's a great unit. And then we come to an interesting class. We come to all the SU-25s. Napalm 1 can go where Napalm goes. Maybe a bit better than the rest, because it actually can use its gun and so on. But still not great. But the other ones are more interesting. The HE one has the problem. It struggles to get it needs to get so close to the target, and it is a slow flying unit, 550 kmh. So getting to actually drop off its bombs without being stressed out is problematic. It has air-to-air missiles though, so it's a multi-role, and it can still use its gun. if you can just turn off the bombs and just use it as a gun runner, and then it's still pretty okay. And if it ever gets its 6 500 kg bombs off, enemy has a hard time dodging it because it drops them so low, and it nukes stuff with that as well. So if you ever get it off, it's pretty high potential as well. I would put that as a low B tier unit. And then we have the SU-21 Rocket 1 with 80mm rockets, and it's 30mm gun that has AP power that can kill off APCs and IFVs quite easily, deal a bit of damage to tanks. So this one still can shred through those kind of things as well. And then we have the Rocket 2, which adds 122mm rockets to the whole thing, and those help out really getting it consistent. And with that, I would put it into low A tier here, as a 5 points extra for those extra class of rockets is nice. It loses one availability as well, but as an individual unit, it is really solid. So, SU-25 rocket here, yeah, I would put it around these guys because it can. I would put it maybe slightly ahead of these rocket lanes because it can kill off armored vehicles pretty efficiently, and it's pretty cheap for that. Like, it can shred through a couple of IFVs, and that is pretty helpful. And it really shreds any infantry squad as well with those extra rockets, and even the high hit point ones. So that is pretty interesting. And that gets us to the next nation, which has a lot of planes actually, and that's the British. And here we start with the Buccaneer. And we start with the Buccaneer HE. Only 20% ECM, 220 points. It has AM9Ls, and it has 500kg bombs, but it drops them from high altitude. So yeah, once more the difference to the dive bombing MiG-23 MF. And yeah, it doesn't have a gun, so it can't fight a head-on fight with its AM9Ls. It can't hunt helicopters. And it only has 20% ECM. It's decently fast, but it's a mediocre high altitude bomber, so another C tier unit for me. And then we have the Buccaneer LGB, which has decent paveway bombs. It has 30% ECM. It doesn't have the air-to-air missiles though. It drops the AM9s for some extra ECM, for some, and the targeting pod for the LGB. It's a pretty cheap LGB plane, and it still has 30% ECM. And the paveways deal a bit more less damage than the LGBs over here, but they still can kill a good amount of stuff. So yeah, it's an LGB. It's okay-ish. It's not amazing. Then we come to the Harriers, and they are pretty alright. They are decently fast. The first one, the HE1, comes with some sidewinders. So it's a good helicopter hunter as well, with the Ardent 30mm helping out there as well. And 2 450kg bombs. So it can nuke most things. And if you compare it, for example, to the F5, that's pretty nice. It has the F5 HE. Like, it's a bit slower and has 2 less hit points, but it's 50 points cheaper, whilst having better sidewinders. So it's really nice for the Harriers here. Like, the only thing that is an issue is that it gets one-shotted by the big AA pieces. That's the one big deficit of the Harrier, but the F5 still doesn't get its bombs off at those engagements, and if there's just anything with a gun, it will go down as well. So yeah, it's not a massive deficit if you save 50 points for it and on top. And then we have the Harrier GR5, and that loses the sidewinders, but it gets 2 500kg bombs for it, and that means it can one-shot everything. And I think that makes it a really good bomber. Yeah, I consider putting it into S tier, because but it's not quite there. It still gets one shot, but it can one shot everything on the ground. And for 15 points more than the HE, that's a nice thing. It's slower, but it has better ECM. So yeah, and it has that it can one-shot everything potential. So Harrier HA2 is really nice. And here I would even put this above all of these guys. Where to put this? I would even put it above the Mercip. So yeah, the HE1 here going pretty high as well. The Harrier's pretty cost efficient. Harrier rockets. There we start with the Rocket 2, which only has rockets. 120 points. It's only snap rockets. That doesn't have the helicopter hunter capabilities. And here, the not being fast in, fast out is a bit of a deficit, like compared to the MiG-21s. I feel like for these, it's important targets that you want to nuke and you get that in. Here, it's often just like being annoying, and the Harrier is not as great at that. So I would put it here into C tier. The Rocket 1 has the Sidewinders, so it can hunt helicopters, but yeah, also only snaps. Snap is a solid rocket, but not the most amazing, and I would put that not quite as high as the S222s, and yeah, let's leave it somewhere. I would leave it behind the Su-22 Rocket 1, and yeah, 25, and leave it there. And then we come to the British Jaguars, where we start with the Jaguar HE, and that can one-shot everything as well. And it has AM9Ls, and yeah, it has 6 500 kilogram bombs, so it really one-shots everything out there. So that puts it around. It has 30% ECM as well, and that puts it above these guys here. And I actually would put it pretty high as well. Like, this is a good plane. Jaguar HE, one of the reasons to play 4th Armored in my eyes. Like, it really does the job there pretty well. Then we have the Jaguar HE1 that has extra reload time, 240 so 4-minute reload time, and it has worse bombs. It gets extra reload time, goes from 180 to 240, and it gets worse bombs. And those spread out a bit more, and it's only 227, so they don't quite kill everything. It's a bit cheaper, but it doesn't kill everything. And it has 10% less ECM as well, compared to the G1A. So that is an issue. And I think that puts the HE1 into B tier here. No, I mean, still compared to the Super Dart, it loses ECM. It gets the Sidewinders, which we considered earlier was a considerable buff. So yeah, let's put it around the Mirage here. That sounds about fine. HE2 has low reload time and has 500 kilogram bombs. That's another good one. That's another A tier 1 here. And yeah, it goes next to the Jaguar HE. It has the better missiles out of these two. Like, those are basically identical planes outside of the M9Ls versus the Mirage 2. The Magic 2 that the Jaguar HE gets, the French one. So the British one is slightly better. And then we get the Jaguar rocket. And that can hunt down helicopters, as it has AM9Ls. So, as we talked about earlier, it has Hydra rockets. So, yeah, decent rockets there. Not amazing. But as it is a helicopter hunter, that gets us into 8 tier here. As it's a fast helicopter hunter there as well. Pretty quick speed. A decent 30mm gun, and the AM9Ls as pretty good sidewinders. So, those go quite nicely as well. Then we come to an interesting plane, the Phantom FGR-2, as this is the only bomber that also carries, well, like these planes here, as it has a brother that we come to in a second, they carry sky flashes. They are the only bombers that also carry long-range missiles. And that makes them pretty strong, as the sky flash can stun down enemy planes. Also allows them to just loiter a bit after dropping their bombs and keeping other things safe. But yeah, most important thing is that they can shoot it at enemy planes coming in, stress them out, and protect itself. And the cluster one that we have here first actually carries 4 500 kilogram bombs and 4, so that can kill everything on the ground, every HE target as well. And it also carries 4 cluster bombs, so sometimes those 4 500 kilogram bombs are not quite enough. Then the cluster does the kill, and also gives it a bit more AoE against vehicle blobs. So the cluster one, I am not sure if it's a top of A tier or if it's even an S tier. Let's put this one in S tier. Let's put the pure HE one, as it also has a bit longer reload time, because it has 6 bombs. Let's put that into A tier territory here. So yeah, those multi-role planes are pretty good. The cluster one is fantastic. 20% ECM, pretty fast, and the Sky Flash is really, really helpful. And we have a Tornado HE. Yeah, that drops the tower altitude. It has multi-role purpose. It has 30% ECM. It is a quick plane, and the drop pattern it has is pretty okay. It is pretty expensive. With its multi-role capabilities and so on, it's nice, and it can smack down light vehicles and infantry on the ground quite nicely. It doesn't kill any tanks or anything, so yeah, it paying off fully takes a while, but it at least can come around a decent amount quite often, and can help with air superiority as well. So a decent C tier unit here. So yeah, last of the British units, leaving us with 2 nations to go, and we get to the biggest of the NATO nations, plane number wise, and maybe even bigger than the Soviets here, I believe, as well, with the Americans, starting with the A-10 rocket. And the A-10 rocket, we have an HE variant there as well. A-10 rocket has Hydras, has AM-9M sidewinders, and has the amazing Avenger gun. So all of that makes it pretty nice. It pays 215 points for it, so it's a good bit more expensive than its SU-25 counterpart, but it has a good bit better Avenger gun that actually can kill tanks. And it's a bit slower as well. Slightly better ECM as well, though, with 20. So all of that still makes it a pretty good plane. I would put it behind the HE planes here. But yeah, above the Mirage, above these Jaguars. And yeah, it's a pretty good, pretty good plane. The Jaguars only having 20% ECM here. Yeah, A-10 rocket is in a good place. A-10 HE, it has terrible HE bombs, only 227 kilogram bombs, has a fantastically long reload time of it, and has a struggle to get them off. And that means it's also can't use its bombs and its gun at the same run. That's a similar issue for the SU-25, but at least the SU-25 murders shit when it drops its bombs. This one doesn't. And it also is way cheaper, the SU-25 HE. So, yeah, the A-10 HE is not so great. I would put that into C tier. HE, the rocket one, is way better at using its stuff, actually. So, that goes around there. And then we come to the A-37B, and that's an interesting plane, carrying 119 kilogram bombs and 227 kilogram bombs, and it carries quite a bit of them. Carries 8 bombs total, 4 of each. It has a Gao gun that doesn't really do much damage. Costs 90 points. It's slow, 650%, 6 hit points, so get 1 shot and 0 ECM, so similar stats to the L-39s. And I think it's worse, because it doesn't carry 500 kilogram bombs. It's a lot more expensive, so I think the E-37 here. Actually, let's put it into D tier territory. Don't use this. Napalm, absolutely. D tier territory. And same goes for the Intruder. Sad for it, but D tier territory. Don't use it. And then we have the Corsair. A7D Corsair coming along. And A7D comes with 4 900 kilogram bombs. They slap. Like, they absolutely slap. 14 HE. So, whatever it hits, it murders. It's pretty decently fast, has 20% ECM, has 2 sidewinders, and costs 260 points. So it's not more expensive than the other bombers up here, whilst just absolutely nuking territory. So it doesn't have the high ECM and the speed of the Mirage 5B quite, whilst, but it has the better sidewinders. So actually, let's put the A7D here above the F16 by just absolutely nuking stuff. The A7D Corsair rocket is relatively expensive for a rocket plane, but it is multi-role. It's not quite as cost efficient as the guys up top, but it's not really doing the job better. 20% ECM instead of 30% ECM for the S22s. Like, this should be 150 points. It has a lot of rockets. It has 114 rockets, but it can't get them all out because it's Hydras, and yeah, so you would have to circle around a couple of times to get them all out, and that's not gonna happen. So yeah, it's B tier territory, but it's still a decent plane. Bringing us to the next plane, the F111 HE, and that has 5 minutes reload time for dropping terrible bombs that in a way too long pattern, whilst all of those bombs also don't do anything individually. That's actually worse than napalm. Just don't take the F111E. Napalm F111E goes here as well. F111F has the same loadout. It goes a bit slower. It's faster and it's slightly more agile for the same price, but it's still a D tier unit. F111Fs and E's, like, yeah, Eugen needs to have a look on this. Like, it's just not working. And I think the issue is that bombs AoE radius is not quite right. So that would help out the high altitude bombers in general a decent bit. If it would be a bit less pinpoint. F111F LGB, that's an interesting one. It drops GBU 11s, 12s, and it can drop them on 2 different targets. The GBU 12 and then we also have the GBU 10 here. It has slightly more damage. But as it drops 2 at one target, it still should kill them. And yeah, you get both of these guys. And with being able to kill 2 units at once, that's another A tier territory unit. It doesn't have the multi-role of the... And the F111 suffers under massive issues with its turn radius as well. Got slightly buffed in the past, but it's still pretty terrible. So that's another reason why I wouldn't push them harder compared to some other LGBs. And yeah, it doesn't have the multi-role capabilities of the French one or the MiG-27K. But outside of that, the LGBs here still slap pretty hard. And yeah, would put them up there. F111F napalm goes where all the other napalm goes. Let's put the other napalm units here around there as well. This one has HE bombs next to it, but it still carries napalm and pays for it. Don't. Just don't, guys. And then we come to the Nighthawk. The Nighthawk is an LGB bomber, and it also is invisible. And the Nighthawk is still amazing. The enemy can struggle to find them, and if they do so, you can just murder shit with these. So, F117 Nighthawk, S tier unit. Fantastic. The stealth is so important. It's nowhere on the stats card, but this thing is super hard to spot for anything. Radar AA is imperative to have any chance, and even then, you mostly only see it after in the short period after it dropped its bomb, as it gets a stealth modifier at that moment, or if you have a plane right next to it. Otherwise, it is really hard to find this thing. So that thing is still fantastic. And same fantastic thing goes for the F-15E Strike Eagle. It can hit 2 things at once, is fantastically fast, has chances of winning fights in the air, can hunt down helicopters if need be as well. So it's cost the same as the LGB2 Su-24 here, whilst being able to multi-roll, having higher survivability. And yes, it can hit one less target per run, but it still can hit 2 targets in each run with its 4 LGBs here, GBUs. It drops them in pairs and it nukes everything with it. And that is still able to pay you off in one run, whilst also just being so much more flexible. So yeah, F-15 Strike Eagle, it's expensive as hell, but it is great as heck as well. So it goes up there. F-16C is only dropping 227 kilogram bombs. That's a pain. It's pretty cheap. It's multi-roll. It has 30% ECM. It has AM9Ms. So all of that is fine. The multi-roll capabilities are there, but the main role of being an HE bomber is not quite there. So I think it's the highest CTA unit here. Like, it's good at everything but being a bomber. That's pain of your bomber. Yeah, goes around here. F-16C HE2 just adds up the bomb numbers, meaning that it might kill things a bit more, but it's still 227 kilogram bombs, and it also means that it goes to 6-minute reload. And it pays extra for that. And that's not great. Like, that's pain. 6-minute reload there. Yeah, struggling similar issues here. Like, just being pushed into the end of the food chain. At least it has multi-roll, but it still struggles there. Then we have the F-16 LGB, which comes with AM9Ms, 30% ECM. Yeah, it goes similar things as the Mirage. It's a bit cheaper, has worse LGBs that don't quite always one-shot everything, but it still does decent damage there. And the 30% ECM are pretty fine as well. So yeah, it's decently priced as well. Good unit. Napalm, no. HE, the F4E Phantom, is interesting. It has AM9Js. It is pretty cheap. It has terrible bombs. It has terrible 227 kilogram bombs, but it is cheap. And it can help out as a multi-roll against helicopters and so on. So I would put it above the F5 here, as it is cheaper than the F5, but being a better airframe. Yeah, having better sidewinders and so on. But it also has worse bombs. But it has at least 4 of those, and yeah, it still does a decent job here. So that gets us to the West Germans, where we have some interesting units as well. Starting with the Alpha Jet for 227 kilogram bombs, 10% ECM, 650 kmh. Yeah, 227 kilogram bombs, not amazing. We just put that thing there. It has the Mauser gun, which actually can do a bit of damage against helicopters and all. And that multi-roll capability keeps it above the A37, but it's still a C-tier unit here. Then the F-104 HE drops 2 good bombs from high altitude, is fast as heck. It gets one-shot by everything, and it has not the most amazing turn radius. And the 2 bombs are mostly good against infantry and decent against tanks, but it's not amazing there. And yeah, it has been nerfed in price and all a lot in the past. It was an S-tier bomber in the past. It is absolutely not anymore. Still think it's a B-tier unit though. I still think, because of its high speed and just being pretty affordable still, I still think it's a pretty valuable asset for the TKS. And then F4F HE1, that is another one that drops a lot of terrible bombs, keeping it into, yeah, it's similar to this guy, actually being 30% ECM, like being pretty much identical, only having worse sidewinders as well. So yeah, F-16C actually is better. F4F goes down here. Then F4F HE2, that has good bombs and a lot shorter reload time, and can murder everything for the same price. 450 kilogram bombs, 5 of them actually can murder stuff. that's a good plane. Like, it has 2.5 minutes reload, so that's a lot better than 6-minute reload. And it actually kills things better as well. So F4F HA2, that goes along these guys here, has 30% ECM, and actually has one more bomb. So to really make sure that it kills stuff. Well, actually, same bombs as... No, one less bomb than these guys, but one more bomb than these. And yeah, the slightly better Sidewinder, or the better Sidewinder and so on. Yeah, I would put it above the Mercip, just around here. 30% ECM, Sidewinders, 1100 kmh. That's good stuff. F5 rockets has Zunis. Zunis are good rockets. Doesn't have the capability of being able to use anything else, but I think it's slightly better than the B tier one, or where did we? No, we ended up putting this into C tier. Let's put this into B tier. It can play its role. Like the Zunis are good enough to kill off. Yeah, they have really quick reload time, only 30 seconds. Like, this is a good thing about this thing as well, and they're good enough to kill most light units, like an ATGM position and so on. And it has 30% ECM. It is fast, so the enemy has struggles killing this thing. So it's a nice overwhelming unit. Back in the days when 5th Panzer could actually air spam a lot, it was played there quite a bit because of that. So it did a good job there. Then we have the Ginas. We have the Gina HE, which drops 119 kilogram bombs. Those are pretty useless. The DEFA gun on it is nice to kill helicopters, but the bombs are pretty useless and can't use both at once. The rocket can use both at once, and the rocket also has it, so it has the DEFAs and the snaps are pretty decent. It's also pretty fast, 800 kmh. So yeah, 0 ECM still, but only 75 points, and it has rockets, and that puts it into decent C tier territory. And then we have the Tornado HE, which drops 450 kilogram bombs. Decent reload time because of that. Only 90 seconds. It has AM9Ls, it has 30% ECM, and it's pretty fast as well. And it drops at high altitude, but those bombs land pretty decently. It's cheaper than the British one, because it drops a good bit less bombs, but it drops them more accurate, so that's pretty fine. And I would put it around here. And then we have the Mehrzweckwaffe. And we talked about the cluster earlier with the other guy, with the KGMU. And there the issue was that it was low survivability, and the Tornado, and no multi-roll. The Tornado has higher survivability with 20% ECM, has better agility, I believe, a bit as well, or it's at least similar, but it has the better ECM, so it means it gets out. It still has the annoying 6-minute reload time. And if the Mehrzweckwaffe would ever go down to like 4 minutes reload time, 3-minute reload time, it would be fantastic, because it also is a multi-role plane. Without that, it's not as great. Like the Mehrzweckwaffe can clean on 2 legs or so, but the long reload time keeps it back. Like, the weapon itself, and if it would be fairly reload time, it would go up to A tier. With the long reload time, it's a C tier unit. But it's a lot better than the KMGU. Like, it's high C tier, low B tier kind of territory. So yeah, that's the tier list. We have a couple of S tier units, but when it comes to planes, the AT planes currently dominate. The LGBs, for the most part, do pretty fine. Yeah, there we go. It's a long tier list, and yeah, some interesting units here around, for sure. Like the couple of new loadouts that they have added lately, like the Phantoms and so on, really added some nice stuff. But there's still a lot of useless planes, and the current state of napalm is just pretty appalling. So yeah, F111s also need some help. Like, high altitude and napalm keeping bombers back, and that's why bombers currently, like, yeah, there is some issues here for sure. But still, you have enough good planes out there to make air spam absolutely viable in some scenarios still. Stress on Mist helped a lot in making it more manageable, and that was a great addition. Before the dive bombers just dominated completely together with the LGVs. By now it's a bit more manageable, and yeah, it's. I hope we will see some napalm fix, and then they will be interesting here to see where they go. But for now, this is where it is, and yeah, hope to see you in the next one, guys. Bye bye, and have a great day.